Hello, this is my first video essay on Italy's reaction to the war, Mussolini's downfall, and the treatment of Jews by Italian civilians and soldiers. Okay, so first I would like to give a brief overview of Italy's involvement in World War II and the initial support Mussolini gained and how he came to power. So Mussolini was the leader of Italy at the time of World War II, was part of the Axis powers, which were allies with Germany and Japan. Mussolini brought Italy a fascist government, which gained popularity in the 1920s because he promised to address the struggling economic issues of Italy and restore it to its former prestige. In 1992, in Rome, Mussolini solidified control of the country by being appointed as prime minister. Over the next decade, Mussolini centralized the power to himself as prime minister and suppressed his political opposition. In 1936, Italy formed an alliance with Nazi Germany, and throughout the Rome-Berlin axis, Mussolini's goal was to counter the influence of the Western democracies and secure a place for fascism and Italy's place as a major European power. This alliance sets the stage for Italy's active involvement in World War II alongside Germany. A couple of key notes from World War II. Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935 as a conquest aimed to establish Italian colonial power. The reason they entered into World War II officially was in June of 1940. Officially on the side of the Axis powers, Mussolini believed joining this war effort would secure territory that he wanted to gain and enhance Italy's standing in Europe. Some of the challenges and setbacks that Italy were having during World War I is their invasion of North Africa and their invasion of Greece in 1940. They both faced heavy resistance, and Italy's military shortcomings became evident after long periods of battle, leading to increased dependence on Germany's ability to support them. So when the tides of the war started to change, Italy started to go on the downturn, especially when the Allies successfully came up through Africa and invaded Sicily in the 1940s. Mussolini was arrested during, especially 1943, after the Allies gained a lot of control in Italy. Alright, so next I want to focus on the Italian people's reactions from the beginning when Mussolini got into power and the war just started till the end, till Mussolini got kicked out of power. So, at first, when Mussolini first got into power, first elected as prime minister, just starting the war, there was a sense of initial enthusiasm. There was like, great, we're gonna restore our former glory, we're gonna get all this land back, we're gonna conquer all these places, we're gonna deal with all these economic issues, a lot of nationalistic behavior, as many people supported Mussolini's ambitions for the country. So after a while, when we get in the mix of the war a little bit, Italy faced a few Italian defeats, especially in North Africa and in the invasion of Greece, which declined the Italian people's enthusiasm for the war effort as a whole because they weren't getting these swift victories. They were these long, drawn-out battles that they were losing even though they had superior forces, which just showed off a little bit of their military incompetence at the time under Mussolini. It cost a lot of human lives, a lot of economic resources, and people just got tired of the war. Eventually, they thought under Mussolini the economic issues would get fixed. Initially they did, but then even harder economic times came upon the country as they experienced shortages of many essential goods. There was crazy amounts of inflation. There was a whole sense of economic instability throughout the country and growing discontent for Mussolini. And then there was internal dissent where people weren't really sure about how the military was functioning and how Mussolini's regime as a whole was doing. A lot of opposition groups gained power at this time. A lot of anti-fascist fascist people gained momentum, as fascism wasn't really looking great for Italy as a whole because they were losing a lot and they didn't look great on the world stage. Especially during the fall of Mussolini, in which part, like, internal dissatisfaction, the inability to govern effectively and address the nation's challenges really led him to decline heavily in popularity and eventually be kicked out. There was a heavy amount of civilian and just casualties and people being moved due to the war. I mean, the Allies came up through Africa, conquered Italy, not conquered fully Italy, but like got a bunch of control almost all the way up to like about Sicily, and people were just done. There was a lot of civilians who got caught in the crossfire, a lot of just normal everyday people, not even soldiers, dying, and many people had to be taken from their homes because Italy was losing so much ground on that like southern battle right there. Yeah, and that Allied invasion was the biggest turning point for Italy in the war, and especially the Italian people's reaction. Many people saw like the Allies coming in and were like relieved, like finally we're done with this fascist guy. Like they saw it as liberation from Mussolini's rule, and it varied across different parts of the region, but there were people who were actually relieved that the Allies were coming up through Italy, and many like civilians were like, hooray, the Allies are here, finally we can get rid of Mussolini. There was even a point of civil conflict among Italians because there were very few who still supported the fascist cause and supported what Mussolini was saying, but that led to clashes who favored the new government under King Victor Emmanuel III, and the Catholic Church also played a prominent role in that, as a significant influence of Italians. People were Catholic at the time, and they mostly opposed the fascist regime at the time, citing various Catholic issues, though there were some members hesitant who supported Mussolini and supported his ideas. Alright, so for this next part of the video, we're going to talk about anti-Semitism in Italy during World War II. Italy was anti-Semitic during these times for two major reasons. One was the fascist racial laws pushed in 1938 that introduced anti-Semitic legislation restricting the rights of a lot of Italian Jews, prohibiting them from holding public office, working in certain professions, and marrying non-Jews. And these broader anti-Semitic statements basically spread around the country and followed this ideology. The second biggest reason, and the more well-known reason why Italy was anti-Semitic during World War II, was their alliance with Nazi Germany, and Mussolini aligning himself a lot with Hitler's ideology, and a lot of collaboration in these anti-Jewish efforts. Now, we're going to get into the civilian response towards the Jews in Italy in World War II. There was a lot of variety. Some people had Jewish neighbors and were more understanding, and some Italians, mainly the ones who supported Mussolini, actively helped the anti-Jewish measures and resisted protecting their Jewish neighbors and actually like gave them up. Some people provided acts of solidarity, especially, as you know, like stories of many like people bringing Jews into their home and hiding them during World War II so that they would not be found. Many of the Jewish people would try to evade capture when fascist officers came looking for them, and there were some rescue efforts that some non-Italian Jews participated in by trying to get the Jewish Italians out of the country so that they would be safe and escape these unlawful persecutions. A lot of Italian soldiers' reactions to it, whereas they were just seen as enforcing the law. They thought that what they were doing was right because it's what the government was saying. It's what the regime at the time was saying. It was saying, hey, let's round up all these people and persecute them for absolutely no reason. Like a lot of soldiers would follow these laws to a T. Some I would say most complied. For some, it was seen as too much. Like us, some soldiers would like question these orders and show reluctance or even resistance against doing such things like this because they were doing it to their fellow human beings just because they followed a different religion and they saw something different, which I generally agree with their stances on that. I mean, that goes without saying. Individual acts of defiance. Many individuals in Italy resisted this persecution of the Jewish people. Some would provide false documents, like we mentioned earlier. Some individuals would take Jewish people into their home and hide them from soldiers. And again, another point we made before is a lot of people aided in these efforts to get their Jewish neighbors and friends out of the country, escaping this unlawful persecution. There were many resistance efforts, small resistance efforts, and communities to protect Jewish peoples, like networks of solidarity involving clergy, local officials, many civilians, and other working class people resisting the oppression of their Jewish neighbors. Next, we have the consequences of the treatment of Jews after the wars. Many losses, many traumas throughout Italy. The biggest one being the concentration camps set up in Germany. But Italy also had some major anti-Semitic laws, as many Jewish people in Europe suffered massive, heartbreaking losses during the war. Many faced displacement as they were thrown out of their homes their families had known for all their lives and thrust into somewhere new. And they could lose massive amounts of family members to this persecution. It was just a horrible, horrible time in Italy. There was a lot of looming trauma over the incidents for many Jews as they were scared for their own lives, rightfully so. And I mean, even after the war, Jewish survivors in Italy faced the task of rebuilding the relations with the people who had just tried to some people who had just tried to persecute and unlawfully segregate and even kill them. There was a worldwide recognition of the suffering during the time of the war, after the war. Many of the Allied countries didn't even believe this was, didn't even know this was happening until after the war, and were shocked to hear the news, though. The world stage was shocked to hear the news of what Italy and Germany did to a lot of these Jewish people. And, support groups and solidarity efforts, big part in the Jewish community after the war, and there were a whole load of challenges reintegrating into these societies and getting people unbrainwashed from these fascist ideas. So after the war, long after the war, Italy recognized and acknowledged what it did, the part it played. Loads of legal proceedings and trials to hold people responsible for the war crimes they committed, especially against the Jewish people. And many soldiers and politicians faced heavy pushback from the actions caused during the war. Some people still deny anything happening to these days, but I think most people recognize that and acknowledge that the treatment of Jews during the war was not great. I mean, especially in Germany. Italy, there were some segments of protection, and there were some people realizing that these laws were unjust, more so in Italy than Germany, but still there was heavy persecution and heavy laws that were unfair and unjust. And many, many years later, there has been an increased amount of historical reflection in Italy's role in the Holocaust, as many scholars and historians have engaged in discussions about the complexities of Italian society during the war, and how some supported these ideas fully because that's what the regime, the government was telling them, and some people pushed back against these unjust laws. And so that is the end of this first video talking about Italy's reaction to the war, Mussolini's downfall, and the treatment of Jews by civilians and soldiers.